Really happy to be here today with Grand Master Middleton. My name is Greg Moody. I'm an eighth degree black belt. I work with a lot of martial arts schools, but I'm kind of here to interview Grand Master Middleton because I have a real interest in working with kids. My background is in education, really, and I've been working with kids in bullying prevention specifically, and how they develop and how they learn to develop in getting better with confidence, self-esteem, and how that helps them being safe in the rest of society, not just from bullying, but from everything else, and become confident. So that's my background. I'm here to interview, though, the real star of the show is Grandmaster Carol Middleton. She just wrote a book called Lessons of the Masters. I've got like a bunch of notes in here that I've been kind of making notes on and marking for my students. So let me introduce her a little bit. Grandmaster Middleton, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, and she's been a grandmaster for many years. She is the head of DC Self-Defense and Karate Association in Washington, DC. And she's got a big list of accomplishments and things. Can you tell us a little bit more about you so I get it all right?
Okay. I started karate when I was in college, and they had, at that time, there was only one school in all of St. Louis where I went to college, and it was too far away for me. But there was a young man in the college who said, would some people like to learn martial arts and self-defense? I was like, yes, absolutely. I always wanted to do that. And so I started taking classes from him. Then I went to graduate school in Oklahoma, and my idea was to get an assistantship, which I did. And I was spending a whole lot of time with the courses and with teaching the labs and so forth. So I thought, I don't have time for karate now. But I heard that Master Jack Huang had a school on the university campus. And if you ever want to learn karate, you better go there. You better see this guy. I was like, okay, that I can't resist. And I went and saw the class, and I thought, he's not just a master martial artist. He's a master at teaching. He's got these people motivated to an unbelievable degree, doing stuff I can't imagine myself doing, but I couldn't resist. I had to do it. So I took his class, and he personally taught me that first lesson. And after he showed me the moves, I had been in a college class since 5th grade, and I had been spending all my time on the things that are academic. My parents didn't even allow me to go out and roller skate with the other kids, which is what I wanted to do. So I figured, I'm 20 years old, I can do this if I want. And I learned a whole lot from him, but also I was so bad at physical things that I had to go through the basics program 4 times before I got up to the yellow belt type of a level.
So you started, not to interrupt you, but you started learning. That's part of what learning perseverance is about. And you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the best physical specimen to do martial arts. I mean, that's kind of a lesson right there, isn't it? That you don't have to be the best physical specimen at the beginning to become great at the end, like you, and to be a grandmaster. And part of the lesson is to learn perseverance throughout that whole process. So anyway, I mean, you're starting to talk about lessons already.
Right. I mean, it was all about lessons. And in my first class, I really hit as hard as I could in the air, and I followed what he did and showed me to do, but I had no balance. I had no power, but I was putting out 100%. And then after he showed me certain moves, he said, okay, now put some power into it. I thought, oh dear, that was it. That was 100%. And he finally got it that's the max. I did my very most best. The thing that made me able to learn more was that I didn't expect myself to be incredible physically. What I see with some of my students going through is the best ones who are really good from the very beginning aren't the ones that go to black belt necessarily. The people that knew they were going to have to work on this kept that, and they worked really hard, and eventually they're the ones that got a black belt. But when I was in his school, I was so persistent, and all my academics had helped me with this. I was so persistent in practicing and doing it over and over again until I could do a little bit. And perhaps, for example, at first I couldn't put my foot up in the air without falling and falling and falling. When I could hold it up there for 2 solid seconds, I thought, I'm getting better. So I came from so low that getting a little bit better made me happy. Whereas there were 70 students in that class, and most of them were like on the football team, on some other sports. And when they couldn't do 100 push-ups, they were unhappy. I'm like, 100 push-ups? It took me 1 year to be able to do one single push-up. So I was happy with myself, and I thought, I'm getting somewhere, and I stuck with it. And I see now when I start having students, the people I thought, they're going to make it to black belt, they're really good, those are the ones that quit. It's the ones that had to work hard that stayed. So he taught me that.
But that's a good lesson even to translate to the students. Like they may think because they're not very talented at the beginning that their outcome might be not very good later. And we've got to be good as instructors to make sure that they hear that story from you, that the outcome can be really, really good. It's a matter of persistence. And then the other side is the ones that are already talented can get diluted into thinking that they can give up early because they can be unhappy. They can give up early because maybe they were so talented that they didn't have success right away. And so those are the lessons. I think they're in your book too. I mean, I think when the first chapter, and your book's really interesting because the title's Lessons of the Masters, and everybody can get this on Amazon. You can get it on paperback. And I was really fortunate. I work with a company called Rev Marketing and Go To Karate, and we helped you publish the book. So that's something that I got to help you with in the process of doing, developing your book. And it's broken up. So again, back to everybody should be getting it because it's on Amazon. You can get it in paperback and on ebook. But it's broken up into 3 parts. One is lessons that you learn from your masters, including the master you mentioned. And I'm pronouncing it right or wrong. Master Wong?
Huang.
Jack Wong. And lessons you learn from masters, then lessons that you taught your students, and then lessons that you learn from your students. So it's a really interesting way, and a really, you're such a humble person. I've known you for quite a long time. We probably know each other for at least 10 years now. So it's a really interesting way and a really uplifting way to read about lessons that you can learn because they're from lots of different sources. But tell me a little bit more about him. What other lessons did you learn from him? Because there's a lot of stuff in this book. We don't have time to go through all of it.
Well, he had been in the military in Korea, and he had been a trainer of the other soldiers in terms of basically the battle, hand-to-hand stuff. So he was really rough. Now, this I wasn't used to. I was used to school and academia, and it might be rough in the sense of mentally hard. But for example, one time he did a sweep on me, and he caught me up at the back of my thigh. It had a bruise this big, and it felt like I had a fist inside of it. So he was very hard. And one of the things I learned from him, because in the beginning I thought, I can't do that. I wouldn't even be emotionally capable of kicking somebody. How could I possibly kick him so hard? I didn't just knock him down. I gave him a bruise that looks like a fist sticking on the back of somebody's side. But I learned I can do this. At first, if you just grabbed my wrist too hard, I thought, ow, I can't, no, you can't do that to me. And then I found out it was hard, it was rough, it scared me to death, and it wasn't so hard. I could do it. I wasn't scared at all. And I was able to go to tournaments. I went to my first tournament at 3 months into the program. I had no idea how to spar. He just threw me in there and he said, you're the only one in the school. You have to go to this tournament. I have to have somebody represented. in the women's division. Most of the time when I went to the women's division, and in those days, there was no women's division, I had to spar with guys and they had no protective stuff. I just said, I'm going to put in a mouth guard at least. And they all laughed at me. And sure enough, the first tournament I went to, I broke 3 ribs and tore my sternum, but that's not how it is nowadays. However, I really got tough. And then I was proud of myself.
Can I ask you something about that, Carol? Because I think, I mean, you're what, about 28 years old now? But in those days, what year was that when you went to that tournament?
I think it was 1971.
So
No.
I think a lot of people now in the martial arts industry, in the business, that are maybe listening to this, and I would love to have this part of our interview sent to everybody. They don't realize that when you were
22 years old.
22 years old in 71, and you were going to the tournament, that you were totally an outlier, and what that was like. What was it like to be a female in that kind of environment? Because that's something pretty amazing that you were in that environment and you stuck it out and were around that group. Can you tell us what that was like?
Yeah, it was really different from now. Now, safety equipment, everybody's trying to make sure that you don't get yourself hurt. You're trained to spar, not full contact, especially to the face. Not at all. No, safety is important. In fact, in my school, I say, what's our number 1 rule? Safety first, ma'am. And they're very respectful. And back in those days, like the first tournament I went to had 3 women and me. And I found out that the one I'm standing next to in line, oh, she's going to be my partner. I had no idea. I started asking her, how long had she been doing this? Well, she'd been doing it. She has a school of her own nowadays. She'd been doing it for like 10 years and was ranked in the top 10 female fighters in the United States. That was my first person that I got because the women's division was non-existent. And
you'd been doing it 3 months, I think you said.
3 months.
Yeah.
3 months. She's the one that hit me so hard with the ridge hand, one ridge hand, broke 3 ribs and tore my sternum. And I kept going. I didn't know what else to do. I'm here, I do it. But nowadays, the idea is you take martial arts and you survive. Why take martial arts so you get beat up the way you hope you never get beat up? And I appreciate that. But it did make me really tough. And I wound up going to tournaments about every 2 weeks. And in forms, from pretty close to the beginning, I would win. And in the sparring, I would wind up in the men's division enough that I got this experience of either the men would be like, well, I don't want to hurt this little lady. And then they would play. I'm like, no, play. I want to do this for real. Or they'd be like, I'm not going to get beat up, I won't. And they would hit me everything. And I got punched in the nose and broke my nose and et cetera, et cetera. So it should be challenging. It should be something that you say to yourself, I never thought I could do this. I'm going way beyond my believed limits. And
so that made you tougher, and it sounds like you appreciated it. Today, it sounds like there's a lot of people that wouldn't be willing to put up with that or wouldn't do it if it was that way today. So it's probably better how we do things today.
Yes.
But would you, how was it being a female regarding like how other people treated you in other ways? Were you treated differently? It sounds like your instructor treated you pretty fairly.
Yes, that was the amazing thing. I started, and after probably 3 months or so, I thought, I know I can never, ever get a green belt. I could never do what those green belts do. Oh my God. And other people were thinking about getting a black belt. Nah. We didn't have very many belts at that time. It was green, brown, black. That was it. And Green was like, whoa, they are tough, they are rough, and they are incredible speed and so forth. He eventually was a coach of the World Taekwondo tournament in Korea, and but he was just tough because he'd been in warfare. Anyway, I believed that I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, and in other places in academia, I mean, I started doing research in microbiology when I was 17. And in other places, I was well thought of, well treated for my academic wherewithal. In martial arts, in the beginning, I was treated like, let's have a date. And flirting and flirting, and I'm like, stop this, be a partner for goodness sakes. Then I go to the next guy, and he'd be like, just abusive, physically and emotionally abusive. And I go from, let's see, I want a date, you can't do this to me. I was not treated well. And honestly, when I went to the tournaments, master instructors were flirting, and one of them, well known, I'm not going to say his name. I was in my hotel room because we had to get there the day before, and he's knocking like heck on the door. Let me in. I'm like, I'm not letting you in the middle of the night. No, sir. But it wasn't much fun. And my sister, who's in ballet and had been since she was 5 years old, I persuaded her to come to Jack Wong's school. And then she went to a tournament, and she was with him. He was going to take her to the place where you line up and so forth. And she went into one of the other master's rooms, and he immediately threw her on the bed and started humping her. She never went back. And it's that kind of thing that would happen. And we went to a school in St. Louis, and the master said, women in karate, what a joke. And they all said this stuff out loud as possible because I was there practicing.
Well, Carol, it sounds like it was a really tough time being in, I mean, that time of the world, or that time in history. Mm-hmm. But your instructor himself was respectful to you.
Yes, and he had no preconceptions that I couldn't do anything. And in fact, when I went to move to Washington, D.C., I went to an instructor and saw that he would tell the girls, we were never women, we were girls, that they only had to do everybody else had to do fingertip push-ups, but the girls could just do 10 push-ups on your hands. Uh-huh. The men had to do 60 or 70 push-ups. The girls only had, I was like, oh no, I'm not having any of this. And after just several months there, he said, you do man's kind of karate. Man's kind of karate. There's only one karate. and another instructor that I went to, because I had 24 instructors along the way, and I went to his school in Virginia, and he said, how did you learn how to side kick that hard? And I said, that was Jack Wong. What did he do? Tell me how you teach that. And so I told him, but he just took me seriously, period.
Well, and that seems like a jumping off point. That's the first chapter in your book. That's a jumping off point for really what helped you be successful in the kind of person you are. If he had treated you like those other people, mm-hmm. Were treating women in that day and age, I'm sure you probably would have left and not wanted to be part of it because they weren't respectful and they weren't treating you as they should have. And in martial arts, it was not just a man's game at that point in a lot of people's minds, but it was a young man's game in a lot of people's mind. They didn't have kids, they didn't have older people. No. It was a very narrow-minded, time of the world. And that didn't change until later. And I think people don't realize that somebody who's been doing it as long as you, in that as a woman it's pretty special. It's pretty special in a lot of ways that I wouldn't say survive that, but we're willing to do it and see the things that you've seen. What about the next instructor that you mentioned in your book, Master Pak?
Yeah, Sankey Pak.
Yeah. How did you go from one to the other?
Okay. Jack Long was in Oklahoma when I first started graduate school in microbiology. And then I decided to do a lesser portion of that, bacteriology. And the fourth best school in the country was in Madison, Wisconsin. So the school had been in Oklahoma, the graduate school. I kept saying to myself, my fifth grade, I was in the gifted classes, my fifth grade was harder than this. And they would say things like primate, and nobody in the class knew what a primate was. I needed to go to a better school. So I went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And after maybe 2 years, Sankey Pack opened up a school. I had known him, just we both were using similar electron microscopes. And we used to talk shop about science and about machines and so forth. And then when he opened up a school, and it was going to be in Taekwondo, which is the style that I had picked because it had a strong kicking style. I knew my little arms weren't going to do much good if I ever needed it for self-defense, but I figured I could kick pretty hard. And he was opening up a Kung Fu school. Really? He was in Taekwondo. But he said it was Kung Fu right then because the TV show had come on and it helped him fill up the school.
Oh, I see.
I went with him, and I did learn some actual Kung Fu because it was like a secondary thing for him. And I learned the soft style and flowing and circling, but he talked philosophy every class, and it was great. Jack Long, he said, as far as philosophy, he says, some people read the Bible. We sweat hard. That's our philosophy. You know, and so I was learning a whole lot about the history of Taekwondo, the philosophy of the martial arts, and I very much appreciated that. And
well, it sounds a little bit like the precursor to what we're doing in the leadership program, where you're training, but you're also making sure that you understand the philosophy behind martial arts. And what we do now is we take that to another level and bring in all the stuff that you're doing in your program, which I know about, which the different books that you bring in and the different things you bring in for the students that you're talking about, like the things we talk about a lot, like the West Point way of leadership, or different philosophies that you're bringing into your curriculum when the students move up to the higher levels. So it sounds like that's really he was doing that, but in a less direct way than you're doing it now, and you've kind of improved on that almost.
yes, and I have to say it's thanks to you and the people in your association, because it was sort of like this was the fourth level for me. The first was Jack Wong, then Sankey Pack, then Grand Master Kim, and then Greg Moody and Associates have brought me to a higher level of here's a way that you can share with your students without just being about your own single philosophy. But I really appreciated his talk constantly about science. For me, we'd always sit aside and do that, and philosophy. And even when he was sitting there in a casual chat with me, he's always bringing it back to the philosophy and the whole reason for why you're in the martial arts. For me, it started out, it was self-defense. That was it. And eventually I realized that it's much, much deeper than that. And he spoke to the deeper me. I understood it a completely different way. So that was the main thing with me, a soft style, a yielding, something that sometimes you do not go with hard karate techniques and everything is, in a way, if you look at the world as a nail, then I got to be a hammer. And I got past that and understood that even in a self-defense situation, it may be better to talk your way out of it. Don't think the best thing to do is, here's how you can kick and hit this guy. And I got way past that understanding, which was not as deep as what I got from Sankey Pack. Then I went on. I was in a PhD program for bacteriology and left and went to Washington, D.C. And I thought to myself, where do I want to move? It's either going to be California, where there's a lot of good programs, or it's going to be Washington, D.C., where Master Kim is, because I had seen him in a lot of the tournaments. And
Right.
people bow down, etc. So I went there and I got a mix. He was always talking about philosophy, how you want to go, but also how you spar, how you get that person when they don't expect this or that.
Right, and I read about him a little bit in your book, and he was the big third instructor that you worked with.
Right. He, at one point, not very long after I joined his school, he was brought up in Black Belt magazine for having the most number of black belts, active black belts, of any school in the United States. 224 active black belts at all levels, all the way, 5th degree, 6th degree, etc. And
Carol, what year was that probably that he had that many black belts?
maybe, I am guessing, maybe 1978 or something, I don't know.
Yeah. So at that time, in 1978, that was a huge number. For people that are listening now, they might think, gee, I have that many, I know that many black belts personally. But, and it's not that I think the black belt quality might be lower now, but at that time it was just different.
Oh, yeah.
People didn't develop into black belts. It was just a different way of being. We didn't have the type of, there weren't as many people in martial arts. There weren't people doing martial arts to that level. But so like 1978, that was a little bit of a different, that was a different accomplishment. So that was really impressive back then. People need to put that in the right context and what the time in the world that was. If they're hearing that now, they might not think that that's that big a deal, but it was a really big deal then. But you moved there, you had an option to do, if I heard you right, a PhD program somewhere like in California, or to follow that path, or to move to DC so you could be with the Master Kim.
Yes, and I did it because of the truly extreme way that the other masters treated Kiwan Kim, and even Jack Huang. Jack Huang and Sankey Pak both recommended, if you're going to DC, you gotta be in Kiwan Kim's school. So he was the most highly recommended by the people that I respected, the masters I had had, and that's where I went. I moved to Silver Spring, Maryland, in fact, which is just a little bike ride from his school. Then at that time, you weren't considered to be really one of somebody's proteges or whatever, unless you went all the way from white belt up with that one. I started over again. I already had a black belt, but I started over again. And I on my first degree black belt exam, I thought he was going to give me a second degree, which is right where I should have been at that point, because he made me do all the second degree stuff. The whole exam was all second degree stuff. And then he said, first degree black belt, there you are. And so, but by the time I got a second degree, he said, the day after the exam, I was there in class. He said, hardly anybody comes the day after your exam, and it was a difficult exam. But one that had an exam not really letting anybody know whether it was male or female. Yesterday, she's here. Oh, whoops. He said it. And then he said, I always thought second degree was the highest any woman could ever go. And only really because if they were in a family of men and brothers that were getting second degree, well, we can let her get this. But she's not really like any other second degree. It's a family tie that I'll bother to give her a second degree. And so he said, but now I have one going all the way. He said, do you know what's the highest rank in Korea? Nobody had any idea. We didn't know. He said 7th degree. I have one now going that far.
Oh, that's awesome.
I knew it was me, not any other second degree. And so I couldn't sleep that night. But he had a way, not that far, but he had a way of motivating his students. And there was one guy that he got his first degree black belt, and I thought, oh my God, he's awful. I don't think he'll ever be able to do a pretty form or, have good technique. Then after Kiwan Kim died, I got possession of a video of one of the exams. And he was in the exam. And he was remarkable. This guy that I thought doesn't really deserve a first degree black belt. He was powerful, precise, and the sparring was just out of sight. His people, even the people he took to a Korean tournament, they said, you can't do punch hand techniques. That doesn't have any effectiveness. And they're all saying that. And so his black belts went ahead and punched people to falling from the punch. And they were powerful with their punches. And he would even say, jab, cross, it doesn't matter. You hit them hard. And then the other masters in Korea began bowing down to the ground to these first-degree black belts because of the technique they got. And I thought, no, I want that too. I don't want, the namby-pamby females can't do much thing. So I did whatever he said the guys were supposed to, that's what I did. And I guess that's when he said, well, he also had seen my students because I had already started teaching. And he would bring, in the beginning, he was like irritated that they were there because I didn't have a third degree. And that was standard for you to be able to give your students an exam. And after the second time that I brought a student to an exam, he started calling them out. Roseanne. And Roseanne didn't recognize what he was saying. I said, Roseanne. And she looked scared to death because he could be pretty intimidating. And so he said, Roseanne, up. That meant, get up, you're going to do something. You show psychic, now. And she did a typical regular psychic, told everybody else, he said, you wrong kind, you no good. Do Roseanne psychic. She was shocked, but I had learned from the various instructors I had how to teach. And then he said he liked my students. They were the best. So he changed his attitude about me. And in fact, he started teaching all his other female students a different way.
Well, so in a big way, you kind of were, well, in a lot of ways, I think everybody should be hearing kind of and we were going to talk a lot about specific parts of your book, and people can read that. They can read that like later when they buy it. And we're not trying to sell the books here. We're just having a nice talk about it. But really, it's great that we're talking about the things that you're mentioning, because I've heard a lot of this from you before, but you were pretty groundbreaking in changing some of the minds of people, your instructors that you met, but probably my guess is a lot of the other instructors that they trained and all the other people that were around you, that they got to see. Hopefully the world was changing and letting women do things too, but also that they got to see Grand Master Carol Middleton become a Grand Master, and they got to see Carol Middleton do things, and they got to see that Carol Middleton was a good instructor, and that it wasn't something that the guys could hang on to and say, well, we're the only ones that are good. They got to see that you were really good, and you broke some ground for a lot of women in martial arts in all the areas that you were in, because it sounds like you had the guts to hang in there with those guys. Not many people would have started out their third month of martial arts and accepted getting a few broken ribs and a torn sternum and then continuing on from there. I think a lot of people now would say, well, that's kind of crazy, but crazy in a good way, I think.
It's just like a lot of people, like Bill Gates, people that have a passion, and regardless of the difficulties, they stick with it. Then's how they get really good. Whether it's somebody playing tennis or whatever it is, they were passionate about it. They put everything into it and get a few compliments along the way. I told my students, when I went to the University of Wisconsin, I kept hearing people wanted to know how to avoid rape. Eventually I gave in and said, I'll teach a class. And Jack Huang had pushed it. And he came and he taught a class for my students. And then he said, wouldn't you all like belts? And I was like, no, I'm full-time in graduate school. I can't, do this belt thing. And they all said yes. And I said, oh no, now I have to teach. And he's going to come up and give belt exams. I relented and started giving them how you pass this yellow belt, green belt, etc. And we went out to dinner with my husband after the first time he came to teach and give belt exams. And he said then, he was telling my husband this, he says, she's the best teacher I ever see. And I was like, oh my God. And so then Jack Huang was really supportive of me, even though I had already started with Sankey Pak. And they fought. I thought once I got them to the same dinner once, and they were fighting each other, not physically, but insulting each other real bad. She my student. No, she my student now. And I never invited the two of them to get in the same place at the same time ever again. But they gave me the compliments that led me to stay with this path and make most of it I could. Oh, and women in the martial arts, they were like, oh, because we got together a lot. We had our own little conferences and trainings and so forth, and affected them as well.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that was so groundbreaking, and people aren't realizing that. You're a very humble person and don't talk about that, and super respectful to everybody that I've ever met. So I'm really glad we're getting this out of you, and I'm getting to hear this story. We got to wrap up, unfortunately, based on our time here. We only got a couple minutes left. I wanted to point out one other thing in the book. In the last part of the book, and again, along with how humble you are, we're talking about the lessons that you learn from your students. And I just wanted to read one quote. I kind of bookmarked it to make sure I mentioned it. So here's what everybody should hear from the quote that this is something that a student wrote. And it says, "My biggest regret about Sensei Carol Middleton is that she cannot be cloned." That's so I thought, I've never had anybody say that about me, that the biggest thing that they wish was that I couldn't be cloned. So that's a pretty exciting thing. I mean, I'm really grateful that you could take the time to talk to me, and we could talk about your book, and it kind of turned into talking about some really great stories about how you came up in martial arts, that I really hope that everybody, whether it's, that my son who's 18 would listen to this and hear about how things were in martial arts and how that it transitioned. I didn't mean it for it to be something about how women's development in martial arts could have changed really a lot of things in the world, that you've had such an impact on everybody around. But I bet it did. It sounds like it. What's that? Yeah, go ahead, please.
I've been in Washingtonian magazine a couple of times, and the last one, which was last year, the writer put, "I discovered that Carol Middleton is the guru of self-defense in this area, because everybody they went to, well, I took it from her for a while, I took this thing from her, and I got my advice and help." And I would spend hours and hours helping somebody set up another school. And anyway, it was like, well, that's another compliment that I really appreciate. And I really appreciate doing this with you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I look forward to it. But anyway, again, everybody should, if you want more, make sure you get the book online. It's really, you priced it really nicely. I can't remember how much it is, but it's on Amazon.com. There's a new edition coming out pretty quick here too, by the end of the week, that's got some additional stuff in it. So Amazon.com, you can get Kindle or paperback. So Lessons of the Masters by Grand Master Carol Middleton. And I'm really excited about it, but maybe we'll do another interview about some other stuff. I really appreciate all the time you spent with us, Grand Master Middleton. And anything else to add before we finish?
Just that things come in lumps and chunks, and what I didn't have until I met you and Stephen Oliver and Jeff Smith, that you can do so much more in getting more people into your school so they get the advantage of this. This is why I do it in the beginning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we really want everybody to do this because it's valuable for everybody. And that's why we're doing this. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you have a great day. And I appreciate all the time you spent on it. Everybody should be, hopefully everybody got a lot out of being here. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.
Okay. Bye.